5 things a 65-year-old man can do to attract a younger woman, based on real experience. What if I told you that the most profound love stories often defy the boundaries that society tries to impose on human connection? I want to share a story that challenges everything we think we know about attraction, age, and the human heart. This is about David, a 50-year-old man who had learned life's harder lessons, and Sarah, a 28-year-old woman who possessed wisdom beyond her years. Their connection wasn't built on the shallow foundations that most people assume govern such relationships. When they first kissed, Sarah looked into David's eyes and said something that revealed the depth of her character. "I'm not doing this to get a promotion or anything else from you. I want you to know that." In that moment, she was declaring her intention to love authentically, without agenda or calculation. Their relationship lasted until geography separated them. But what David learned about attraction, connection, and the qualities that truly matter in love transcends any single relationship. He discovered that the very experiences that make us older are often the same experiences that make us infinitely more valuable as partners. If you believe that wisdom is attractive, that depth matters more than demographics, and that the heart recognizes qualities that have nothing to do with birth certificates, subscribe now, because what I'm about to share isn't just dating advice. It's life wisdom that could transform how you see yourself and your capacity for love. The ancient Greeks had a word, eudaimonia, meaning human flourishing. David's story teaches us that sometimes we flourish most when we stop trying to be what we think others want and start becoming who we truly are.
Number 1. Cultivate inner sanctuary. Sarah told David something that reveals a profound truth about human nature. "I feel safe and protected around you." But this wasn't about physical protection. It was about something far more rare and precious in our chaotic world: emotional sanctuary. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." David had learned this lesson through decades of weathering life's storms. Divorce had taught him that external circumstances don't determine internal peace. Career setbacks had shown that worth isn't measured by position or achievement. Loss had revealed that true security comes from within. When Sarah faced the inevitable stresses of building a career in her 20s, the uncertainty, the self-doubt, the overwhelming pressure to prove herself, David's presence was like finding calm water after turbulent seas. He didn't try to solve her problems or minimize her struggles. Instead, he offered something infinitely more valuable: the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that most storms pass, most failures teach, and most fears are larger in imagination than in reality. This kind of emotional equilibrium isn't something you can fake or perform. It's the natural result of having survived enough challenges to understand your own resilience, having made enough mistakes to develop genuine humility, and having experienced enough loss to appreciate what remains. It's what the Buddhists call unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. Young men, no matter how intelligent or well-intentioned, are often still building this internal foundation. They're naturally focused on establishing themselves, proving their worth, creating security rather than emanating it. There's nothing wrong with this. It's the natural progression of human development. But it means they often need emotional support rather than being able to provide the kind of deep, grounded presence that comes only from lived experience. The paradox of emotional maturity is that the less you need from others, the more you have to offer them. David had reached a stage where he no longer required constant validation, dramatic passion, or external proof of his worth. This freedom from need created space for genuine generosity of spirit.
Number 2. Embody philosophical calm. As an older guy, I wasn't too dramatic or clingy, David reflected. But this wasn't just about avoiding negative behaviors. It was about embodying a philosophical approach to life that most people never develop. The ancient Chinese concept of Wu Wei translates roughly to effortless action, the ability to respond to life's challenges with grace rather than force, wisdom rather than emotion. David had learned, through necessity and experience, to distinguish between problems that required action and those that required acceptance, between conflicts worth having and tensions better left alone. This wisdom manifested in countless small ways. When Sarah had difficult days at work, David didn't take her stress personally or try to fix her mood. When they disagreed about something minor, he had the perspective to see it as a temporary difference of opinion, rather than a relationship crisis. When she needed space to process her own thoughts, he understood this as self-care, rather than rejection. The Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius kept a personal journal that we now call Meditations. In it, he wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does." David had learned this lesson experientially, that most relationship drama comes from overthinking, overanalyzing, and overreacting to normal human fluctuations in mood and attention. Young men often confuse intensity with intimacy, drama with passion. They haven't yet learned that the deepest love often flows in quiet channels, that the strongest connections are built in moments of comfortable silence, and that true intimacy requires the security to give each other space to be fully human. This philosophical approach to relationships, what we might call loving with an open hand, comes naturally to those who have learned that trying to control outcomes usually destroys the very thing you're trying to protect. David could love Sarah fully while holding their relationship lightly, appreciating what they had without desperately clinging to it. The deeper wisdom here touches on something the spiritual teacher Rumi understood. Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. When you stop trying to force connections and start trusting the natural flow of authentic attraction, relationships become exponentially more peaceful and sustainable.
Number 3. Offer the gift of seasoned perspective. She was smart and wise way beyond her years, David observed, and I often had very meaningful conversations with her. I think she probably didn't get that kind of wavelength too often from guys her age. This reveals something profound about intellectual connection that has nothing to do with education or IQ. Sarah possessed intelligence and intuitive wisdom, but she was surrounded by peers who, despite their capabilities, hadn't yet developed the kind of perspective that only comes from applying intelligence to real-world challenges over decades. The ancient Greeks distinguished between different types of knowledge. Episteme was theoretical knowledge, facts, information, concepts. But phronesis was practical wisdom, the ability to apply knowledge skillfully to actual life situations. David brought phronesis to their conversations in ways that their contemporaries simply couldn't. When Sarah wrestled with career decisions, David could offer insights based on having watched countless careers unfold over time. When she struggled with family dynamics, he brought the perspective of someone who had navigated similar challenges and seen how different approaches played out over years. When she questioned her values or direction, he could share the hard-won understanding that comes from having lived through various life phases and seeing what ultimately matters. But here's what made their intellectual connection genuine rather than patronizing. David approached their conversations with what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind, the openness to learn and be surprised. He didn't position himself as the wise teacher instructing the young student. Instead, he brought his life experience to genuine exchanges where Sarah's fresh perspectives often challenged and enlightened him. The German poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." David had learned to be comfortable with life's uncertainties, to find meaning in the questions themselves rather than desperately seeking definitive answers. This philosophical comfort with ambiguity was deeply attractive to an intelligent young woman who was tired of peers who either pretended to have all the answers or were paralyzed by not having any. Their conversations weren't just exchanges of information, they were mutual explorations of meaning, purpose, and the human condition. This kind of intellectual intimacy, where two minds meet in genuine curiosity about life's deeper questions, is incredibly rare at any age, but especially precious when found across generational lines.
Number 4, understand the sacred nature of intimacy. David's reflection on their physical relationship revealed something profound about mature love. Making love to her was more about the mind and not just the body. She was about eye contact, smiling, and feeling cared for. The ancient Sanskrit texts speak of different levels of love and connection. The highest form, prema, is characterized by selfless devotion and the desire to give rather than take. David had evolved beyond the urgent, sometimes selfish sexuality of youth into something more refined. The understanding that true intimacy is about presence, not performance. "I wasn't the kind that wanted to get under sheets and get it done. I liked slow and gentle," he explained. This wasn't about technique or stamina. It was about approaching physical connection with the reverence it deserves. David understood something that younger men often miss, that for a woman of depth and intelligence, physical intimacy is inseparable from emotional and spiritual connection. The tantric tradition teaches that sexual energy, when approached with mindfulness and reverence, becomes a pathway to deeper consciousness and connection. David intuitively understood this principle. His approach to physical intimacy was meditative rather than mechanistic, focused on the present moment and genuine connection rather than goal-oriented performance. Sarah's response, the eye contact, the smiling, the sense of being truly cared for, reveals what she was receiving from this approach. She wasn't just experiencing physical pleasure. She was experiencing the profound human need to be truly seen, truly appreciated, truly cherished. This kind of intimate attention is incredibly rare and becomes more precious as one matures and understands its value. The 13th century mystic Rumi wrote extensively about love as a spiritual force. His poetry often used physical metaphors to describe spiritual connection, understanding that when approached with the right consciousness, physical intimacy becomes a form of prayer, a way of honoring the divine in another person. David's mature approach to sexuality wasn't about technique or performance. It was about creating sacred space for authentic vulnerability and connection. This depth of intimacy is something that most younger men focused on conquest or validation haven't yet learned to access or appreciate.
Number 5. Develop the wisdom to discern authentic hearts. Perhaps David's most crucial insight was this: at my age, I know enough to be able to spot them when I see them. I stay away from those. He was referring to women whose interest was transactional rather than genuine, but his wisdom applies to a much deeper principle about discernment and authentic connection. The Buddhist concept of pragya refers to the wisdom that comes from direct experience rather than theoretical knowledge. David had developed pragya about human nature, relationships, and the subtle signs that reveal people's true intentions. This wasn't cynicism, it was the natural result of having observed enough human behavior to recognize patterns and motivations. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote about different types of friendship: those based on utility, those based on pleasure, and those based on virtue and mutual respect. David had learned to distinguish between these types of connections and to invest his emotional energy only in relationships that honored his authentic self and brought out the best in both parties. This discernment allowed him to recognize something precious in Sarah. Her declaration that she wasn't seeking promotion or special treatment wasn't just about workplace ethics. It was a statement of character. She was someone who valued integrity over advantage, authenticity over manipulation. David could recognize this quality because he had developed it himself and learned to value it in others. The Sufi tradition speaks of recognition, the idea that souls recognize each other across surface differences. David and Sarah's connection worked because they recognized in each other the same values: honesty, depth, genuine care for others' well-being, and the courage to be authentic even when it might be easier to pretend. This kind of recognition requires what the mystics call purified perception, the ability to see beyond surface appearances to the essential qualities that define a person's character. It comes from having learned, often through painful experience, to distinguish between what people say and what they do, between surface charm and genuine kindness, between neediness disguised as love and love that asks nothing in return.
David and Sarah's story illuminates something profound about the nature of human connection that transcends age, circumstance, or social convention. Their relationship worked not because they ignored their age difference, but because they had both developed the maturity to recognize what truly matters in love: character, compatibility, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The 5 qualities that drew Sarah to David: emotional sanctuary, philosophical calm, seasoned perspective, sacred intimacy, and discerning wisdom, aren't strategies to be learned or techniques to be practiced. They are the natural fruits of a life lived with intention, consciousness, and the willingness to grow from every experience. The ancient Greek concept of kairos refers to the right or opportune moment for something to happen, not clock time, but the perfect timing that exists outside of human scheduling. David and Sarah met at their personal kairos, when both were ready for the kind of connection they could offer each other. This teaches us something revolutionary about aging and attraction. The very experiences that make us older in chronological terms often make us infinitely more valuable as partners. The losses that have taught us gratitude, the failures that have developed our humility, the challenges that have proven our resilience, these aren't liabilities in love, they're our greatest assets. The Persian poet Hafez wrote, "I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being." David's story reveals that when we fully inhabit our own being, complete with our age, our history, and our hard-won wisdom, we become capable of the kind of love that transcends superficial attractions and creates genuine, lasting connection. For men navigating the later chapters of their romantic lives, the message is both humbling and empowering. You don't need to become younger to be attractive. You need to become more fully yourself. The woman who is meant for you, whether she's your age or significantly younger, is looking for exactly what you've become through your journey. Someone who has learned to love with wisdom, stability, and authentic presence. If this exploration of mature love and authentic attraction has shifted your perspective on what's possible in relationships, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of men who believe that wisdom is attractive, that depth creates lasting connection, and that the best chapters of our romantic lives may still be ahead of us. Share in the comments, what wisdom have you gained from your life experiences that you now recognize as valuable in relationships? How has your approach to love evolved as you've matured? Your insights could provide exactly the perspective another man needs to hear. Subscribe for more conversations about the intersection of wisdom, authenticity, and love. Because, as David and Sarah prove, when two souls recognize each other's authentic essence, age becomes just one small detail in a much larger story of human connection. The heart, after all, doesn't check birth certificates before falling in love. It recognizes kindness, wisdom, and authentic presence, qualities that often deepen rather than diminish with age.